Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. Perfect. I'll create your pirate romance story set in the United States, Caribbean waters, with supernatural elements. Here's Chapter 1 of A Pirate Captured in Battle Was Offered a Deal. Get me pregnant and I'll give you freedom. But she fell in love instead. Chapter 1. The Crimson Tide. The Caribbean sun blazed mercilessly overhead as cannon fire thundered across the azure waters, sending plumes of black smoke into the cloudless sky. Captain Elias Blackwater gripped the wheel of his ship, the Siren's Revenge, as enemy vessels closed in from three sides. The British naval fleet had been hunting him for months, and today, it seemed, his luck had finally run out. "Captain, the HMS Retribution is gaining fast," shouted his first mate Marcus, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. The deck around them was chaos, men scrambling to reload cannons, others tending to the wounded, and some already preparing to abandon ship. Elias's weathered hands tightened on the wheel as he spotted the approaching warship's figurehead, cutting through the waves like a blade. But what caught his attention wasn't the ship itself. It was the figure standing at its bow. Even from a distance, he could see the commanding presence of someone who didn't belong on a naval vessel. No admiral he'd ever faced had that particular stance, that defiant silhouette against the morning light. "Who's commanding that ship?" he muttered, squinting through the smoke and spray. The answer came sooner than expected. A cannonball crashed through their mainmast, sending splinters flying like deadly rain. The Siren's Revenge lurched violently, and Elias knew they were finished. His crew of 30 had been reduced to barely a dozen fighting men, and their ammunition was nearly spent. "Surrender, and you'll live to see another sunrise." The voice that carried across the water was clear, authoritative, and unmistakably feminine. It cut through the chaos of battle like a sword through silk. Elias laughed bitterly. In his 15 years of piracy, he'd never surrendered to anyone. But as he looked at his remaining crew, boys barely old enough to shave alongside grizzled veterans who'd followed him through countless battles, he realized this wasn't just about his own pride anymore. "Strike the colors," he commanded, his voice heavy with defeat. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "Captain?" "Do it," Elias repeated, watching as the British ship drew alongside. "I won't watch good men die for my stubborn pride." Within minutes, the deck of the Siren's Revenge was swarming with British Marines. But it wasn't a gruff naval officer who stepped aboard first. It was a woman who moved with the fluid grace of someone born to command. Captain Isabella Thornfield was nothing like the soft-spoken ladies of colonial society. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun beneath her tricorn hat, and her green eyes held the cold fire of someone who'd seen too much violence for her 25 years. She wore a modified naval uniform that accommodated her feminine form, while maintaining every ounce of military bearing. Her coat was deep navy blue with gold braiding, and a cutlass hung at her side alongside a pistol that looked well used. Everything about her spoke of competence, danger, and absolute authority. "So you're the infamous Captain Blackwater," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of English boarding schools and American colonial upbringing. "My father has been chasing your shadow for 2 years. Admiral Thornfield's daughter," Elias realized, pieces falling into place. "I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them." "A woman commanding a ship of the line?" Isabella's smile was sharp as her blade. "Surprised? Most men are, right before they find themselves in chains." She gestured to her Marines, who immediately moved to secure the remaining pirates. "You've cost the Crown considerable resources, Captain. Ships, men, cargo. My father estimates your crimes at over 50,000 pounds in damages." Elias stood straighter despite his bonds, meeting her gaze without flinching. He was tall and lean, with dark hair tied back and scars that spoke of countless battles survived. His brown eyes held intelligence and defiance in equal measure. "And I suppose you're here to collect the bounty on my head?" "Actually," Isabella said, circling him slowly like a predator evaluating prey, "I have something else in mind. Something that serves both our interests." The other pirates were being herded onto the British ship, but Isabella motioned for her men to leave Blackwater where he stood. The afternoon sun caught the gold threads in her uniform as she moved, and Elias found himself studying her with unwilling fascination. This wasn't some soft nobleman's daughter playing at war. This was a woman who commanded respect through competence and fear in equal measure. Your crew will be transported to Port Royal for trial, she continued. Most will hang, though the younger ones might find themselves pressed into naval service. But you, Captain Blackwater, present a unique opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Elias asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Isabella stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell the salt spray in her hair and see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. The kind that might keep you breathing. My quarters, 1 hour. We have business to discuss. As she turned to leave, Elias called after her. And if I refuse whatever proposition you're about to make? She paused at the rail, looking back over her shoulder with a smile that promised nothing good. Then you'll hang at dawn with the rest of them. But something tells me you're more interested in survival than martyrdom, Captain. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Elias was transferred to the HMS Retribution and placed in what could generously be called luxurious quarters for a prisoner. A small cabin with an actual bed, a wash basin, and even a porthole. It was clearly designed for high-ranking captives, which made him wonder just how carefully this capture had been planned. When the Marine came to escort him to Captain Thornfield's quarters, Elias had cleaned himself up as much as possible. Whatever game she was playing, he intended to meet it with dignity and tact. Isabella's cabin was impressive, larger than most houses, with charts covering every wall and a massive oak desk dominating the center. Shelves lined with books and navigational instruments spoke of serious scholarship, while the quality of the furniture indicated serious wealth. She'd removed her coat and hat, revealing a white shirt that emphasized her figure while maintaining perfect propriety. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "Wine? I'd prefer to know what this is about," Elias replied, though he took the offered seat. Isabella poured herself a glass of red wine and settled behind her desk, studying him with those penetrating green eyes. "It's about legacy, Captain, and survival. Mine and yours." She reached into a drawer and withdrew a letter bearing an official seal. "This is my father's latest correspondence. In it, he informs me that unless I produce an heir within the year, the Thornfield holdings, including this commission, will pass to my cousin upon his death." Elias frowned. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything," Isabella said simply. "I need a child, Captain. Specifically, a son who can carry on the family name and secure my position. But the type of man I would normally marry," she gestured dismissively. "Weak colonial merchants or foppish English lords who would expect me to abandon my command and play the dutiful wife." The implications hit Elias like a physical blow. "You're suggesting—" "I'm offering you a bargain," Isabella interrupted. "Give me the heir I need and I'll give you something even more valuable than your life. Your freedom. Refuse, and you hang tomorrow." The cabin fell silent except for the creaking of the ship and the distant sound of waves against the hull. Elias stared at this woman who just proposed the most audacious deal he'd ever heard. Part of him wanted to laugh at the sheer boldness of it. Another part recognized the cold calculation behind her green eyes. This wasn't passion or desperation, but pure pragmatism. "And after?" he asked quietly. "Assuming I agree to this madness, what happens when you have your heir?" Isabella's smile was enigmatic. "Then you disappear, Captain. New identity, clean papers, and enough gold to start fresh wherever you choose. The child grows up believing his father died heroically in naval service, and I maintain my position and properties. You've thought this through." "I've thought of little else for months," she admitted. "You're not the first pirate I've captured, but you're the first one intelligent enough and suitable enough for my purposes." Elias stood and walked to the porthole, looking out at the darkening Caribbean sky. His ship was already disappearing beneath the waves along with 15 years of his life. His crew was doomed regardless of his choice. The only question was whether he joined them at the gallows or found a way to survive this impossible situation. "How do I know you'll honor the bargain?" he asked without turning around. "Because I need you alive and cooperative, not resentful and broken," Isabella replied. "A man who believes he has a future is far more useful than one who knows he's doomed." When he turned back to face her, Elias saw something unexpected in her expression. Uncertainty. For just a moment, the confident mask slipped, revealing a woman who was taking an enormous risk on a desperate plan. "1 year?" he asked. "Less, if we're fortunate." Elias looked into those green eyes and realized he was about to make either the best or worst decision of his life. Then I accept your bargain, Captain Thornfield. Isabella nodded slowly, as if she'd been holding her breath. Isabella, she corrected. Under the circumstances, I think we can dispense with formalities. Elias, he replied, and for the first time since his capture he almost smiled. Outside, night was falling over the Caribbean, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled across the water. The quarters Isabella assigned to Elias were a study in contradiction. Luxurious enough for a guest, secure enough for a prisoner. Located in the stern of the ship, the cabin featured mahogany furnishings, silk curtains, and a proper bed with clean linens. Yet the porthole was barred and he could hear the guard stationed outside his door. For 3 days, they barely spoke beyond necessity. Isabella would visit twice daily, once in the morning to ensure he was being properly fed, and once in the evening to discuss their arrangement with clinical detachment. She treated their conversations like military briefings, outlining expectations and timelines with the same precision she'd use to plan a naval engagement. The ship's physician has confirmed you're in good health, she announced during one of these visits, consulting a leather-bound ledger. No diseases, no obvious defects that might affect the outcome. Elias, who'd been reading one of the books from her personal library, a volume of poetry that surprised him with its romantic themes, looked up with raised eyebrows. I'm flattered by your thorough evaluation, Isabella. Should I expect a breeding certificate? Her cheeks flushed slightly, but her voice remained steady. This is a practical matter, Elias. Sentiment has no place in it. Yet as the days passed, cracks began to appear in her composed facade. He noticed how she lingered longer during their evening meetings, asking questions that had nothing to do with their arrangement. Where had he learned to read? What drew him to piracy? Had he ever considered a different life? You're educated, she observed one evening, finding him engrossed in a treatise on navigation. More than most men in your former profession. Former profession? Elias set the book aside and studied her face in the lamplight. You speak as if it's already behind me. Isn't it? Isabella moved to the chart table, her fingers tracing the coastlines of islands they'd both sailed. Your ship is gone, your crew captured or scattered. The name Captain Blackwater died when you surrendered. And what am I now? She turned to face him, her green eyes reflecting the flickering lamp flame. That depends entirely on you. The tension between them had been building since that first night, an undercurrent neither acknowledged but both felt. Isabella maintained her professional distance during the day, but in these evening encounters something softer emerged. She'd removed her uniform jacket, revealing the simple white shirt that outlined her feminine curves. Her auburn hair had escaped its severe bun, framing her face with loose tendrils that caught the light. You're afraid? Elias said suddenly, the realization hitting him with surprising clarity. I fear nothing, Isabella replied automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. Not of battle? No. Not of commanding men or facing down pirates. He stood slowly, noting how her breathing quickened as he approached. You're afraid of what happens when the armor comes off. This conversation is inappropriate, she said, but didn't step away. Is it? We're bound together in this arrangement, Isabella. Intimacy is rather the point. The word hung between them like a challenge. For weeks they danced around the reality of what their bargain entailed, speaking in euphemisms and clinical terms. But now, in the close confines of his cabin with night falling outside, pretense became impossible. I won't be gentle, she whispered, as if the admission cost her something precious. I don't know how to be anything but what I am. Elias reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and touched her hand where it rested on the chart table. Her skin was softer than he'd expected, though he could feel the calluses from years of handling ropes and weapons. What you are is remarkable, he said quietly, but you're also a woman who's forgotten she's allowed to be vulnerable. Isabella's breath caught, and for a moment, her careful composure cracked entirely. If I'm vulnerable, I'm dead. In my world, weakness is a luxury I cannot afford. This isn't your world, Elias replied, his thumb tracing across her knuckles. This is just us. The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Isabella's lips were warm and surprisingly soft, tasting faintly of the wine she'd had with dinner. When she didn't pull away, Elias deepened the contact, his free hand coming up to cup her face. She responded with a hunger that surprised them both, her arms winding around his neck as if she were drowning and he was her anchor. The controlled, commanding woman disappeared, replaced by someone who kissed like she'd been starving for human touch. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Isabella's eyes were wide, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. "This complicates things," she whispered. "Everything worthwhile is complicated," Elias replied, his forehead resting against hers. Outside, a storm was building on the horizon, and the first drops of rain began pattering against the porthole. But inside the cabin, illuminated by lamplight and possibility, two people who should have been enemies discovered that the line between captivity and freedom wasn't as clear as either had believed. Isabella's hand found his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I," Elias confessed. "But perhaps that's the point." Thunder rolled across the water as the storm moved closer, and in its wake came the promise of change, for both the weather and the two souls finding unexpected solace in each other's arms. 2 weeks had passed since that first kiss, and the dynamic between Isabella and Elias had shifted into something neither fully understood. What began as clinical necessity had evolved into stolen moments of genuine connection, conversations that stretched deep into the night, shared meals where they forgot their respective roles, and touches that lingered longer than strictly required. The HMS Retribution had anchored near a small uninhabited island to take on fresh water and make repairs after weathering the Caribbean storm. Isabella used the respite to establish a routine that gave them privacy without arousing suspicion among her crew. Officially, she was interrogating her valuable prisoner for information about pirate strongholds. Unofficially, she was discovering that Elias Blackwater was far more complex than any man she'd ever encountered. "You're thinking too loudly," Elias observed from where he sat sketching the sunset through the cabin's porthole. Isabella had provided him with paper and charcoal, ostensibly to keep him occupied, but his artistic ability had surprised her. The drawings that emerged were sophisticated, capturing not just the visual beauty of the Caribbean but something deeper, the soul of the sea itself. Isabella looked up from the naval dispatches she'd been pretending to read. "My crew is beginning to ask questions about how long this interrogation will take. And what do you tell them?" "That intelligence gathering requires patience," she replied, setting aside the papers. "But Lieutenant Morrison is particularly observant. He's noticed the improved quality of your quarters, the books, the art supplies." Elias set down his charcoal and turned to face her fully. "Are you having second thoughts about our arrangement?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to voice. Their relationship had grown beyond the simple transaction they'd originally negotiated. Isabella found herself looking forward to their time together, with an eagerness that had nothing to do with duty or necessity. When Elias touched her now, it wasn't performance, it was desire, real and consuming. "I'm having thoughts," Isabella admitted, standing to pace the small space. "Just not the ones I expected." She'd changed from her formal uniform into a simple dress of deep blue silk, a concession to their private arrangement that felt increasingly natural. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and in the golden light of the setting sun, she looked more like a woman than a naval commander. "Such as?" Elias prompted, though his voice was gentler than usual. Isabella stopped at the chart table, her fingers tracing familiar coastlines while she gathered courage for honesty. "I told myself this was purely practical. Produce an heir, secure my position, give you your freedom. Clean, simple, mutually beneficial. And now I find myself caring what you think of me, wondering what you did before you became a pirate, imagining," she paused, vulnerability making her voice small, "imagining what might happen if circumstances were different." Elias rose and crossed to her, his movements careful and deliberate. "Isabella, look at me." When she turned, he was struck again by how young she seemed without her armor of authority. 25 years old, commanding one of the most powerful ships in the Caribbean, yet in this moment she looked like any woman grappling with unexpected feelings. "Tell me what you're imagining," he said softly. Her laugh was shaky. "Impossible things. A life where I'm not defined by my father's expectations or my need to prove myself worthy of respect, where I could simply be happy." "With a reformed pirate?" There was no mockery in his voice, only genuine curiosity. "With a man who sees me as more than just my rank or my usefulness," Isabella replied. "You don't look at me the way other men do, like I'm an anomaly to be tolerated or a prize to be won. You see me Elias cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. You are extraordinary, Isabella Thornfield. Not because you command a ship or carry your father's legacy, but because of who you are when all of that falls away. The kiss that followed was different from their previous encounters, deeper, more desperate, filled with the weight of unspoken emotions. Isabella's hands fisted in his shirt as if she could anchor herself to this moment, to this feeling of being truly wanted for herself rather than what she represented. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. The cabin had grown dark around them, illuminated only by the stars visible through the porthole and the soft glow of the lamp on her desk. Elias, Isabella whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. I know, he replied, understanding without words what she couldn't bring herself to say. They moved together toward the bed, not with the calculated purpose of their arrangement, but with the natural progression of two people who'd found something unexpected in each other. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she began unbuttoning his shirt, and Elias covered them with his own. We don't have to, he began. I want to, she interrupted, her green eyes meeting his with certainty. Not because of our bargain, because I want you. Outside, the Caribbean night settled around them like a velvet shroud, the gentle lapping of waves against the hull providing a rhythmic soundtrack to their whispered endearments and shared discoveries. For the first time since striking their deal, both allowed themselves to forget about duty, expectations, and the uncertain future. In the darkness of the cabin, Captain Isabella Thornfield ceased to exist, replaced by simply Isabella, a woman learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness but courage, and that sometimes the most unexpected captivity could lead to the greatest freedom. When dawn broke over the Caribbean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they lay entwined in the narrow bed, neither speaking but both acutely aware that something fundamental had changed between them. What had begun as a transaction had become something far more dangerous and far more precious. The sound of the ship's bell calling the crew to morning duties eventually intruded on their peace, reminding them both that reality waited beyond the cabin door. But for now, in these stolen moments before the world intruded, they held on to each other in the impossible hope that love might be stronger than duty. 3 months had passed since that pivotal night, and the HMS Retribution was making its way back toward Port Royal. Isabella stood at the bow of her ship, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, while the other gripped the rail. The ship's physician had confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks. Their arrangement had succeeded beyond her original expectations. But success, she was learning, came with complications she'd never anticipated. Captain, Lieutenant Morrison approached with the day's reports, his weathered face creased with concern. The men are asking when we'll be putting the prisoner ashore for trial. It's been nearly 4 months since his capture. Isabella kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced. Morrison had been her father's officer before becoming hers, and his loyalty was absolute, but so was his adherence to naval protocol. The intelligence he's provided has been invaluable, Lieutenant. Every pirate stronghold he's revealed has yielded significant captures. Aye, ma'am, but the Admiralty will expect a public execution. Blackwater's name alone would draw crowds from across the Caribbean. The symbolic value. I'm well aware of the symbolic value. Isabella cut him off, perhaps more sharply than intended. I'll determine when his usefulness has ended. Morrison's pale blue eyes studied her face with uncomfortable intensity. He'd known her since she was a child visiting her father's ships, had watched her grow from an impetuous girl into a formidable commander. He also knew her well enough to recognize when something was troubling her. Permission to speak freely, Captain? Isabella nodded, though she dreaded what was coming. There are rumors among the crew about your frequent interrogations with the prisoner. Some of the men are wondering if perhaps he's exerted some unwelcome influence over you. The implication hit Isabella like a physical blow. In her world, any suggestion that she'd been compromised by a prisoner, especially a male prisoner, could destroy her career and reputation instantly. The fact that Morrison was warning her meant the whispers had already reached dangerous levels. Thank you for the warning, Lieutenant, she said carefully. I'll take your concerns under advisement. After Morrison departed, Isabella remained at the rail, staring out at the endless blue expanse while her mind raced through possibilities. Every option seemed to lead to the same terrible conclusion. She would have to choose between the life growing inside her and the man who'd helped create it. That evening, she made her way to Elias's quarters with heavier steps than usual. She found him reading by lamplight, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made her heart ache with tenderness. When he looked up and saw her expression, the book was immediately forgotten. "What's happened?" he asked, rising to meet her. Isabella closed the door and leaned against it, as if she could barricade them both from the approaching reality. "We need to discuss the future." Elias's face grew serious. "The child?" "Yes." Isabella moved to the chart table, needing something solid to lean against. "And what it means for both of us." Over the past months, they'd carefully avoided discussions of what would happen after their bargain was fulfilled. Instead, they'd existed in a suspended bubble where duty and emotion coexisted in careful balance. But now, with new life quickening inside her, and Port Royal growing closer each day, that balance was about to shatter. "Tell me," Elias said simply. Isabella took a shaky breath. "The crew is asking questions. My lieutenant suspects our relationship has gone beyond interrogation. If word reaches the Admiralty that I've been compromised by a prisoner, especially one as notorious as Captain Blackwater, it won't matter that I'm carrying the air I need. I'll be court-martialed and stripped of rank. And the alternative? Public trial and execution within the week of our arrival." The words came out flat, emotionless, as if she were discussing weather patterns rather than the death of the man she'd grown to love. Elias was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, with the acceptance of a man who'd always known this day would come. "So our bargain ends as planned. You get your heir and your freedom from family obligations. I get a different kind of freedom. Don't." Isabella's composure cracked, revealing the anguish she'd been hiding. "Don't make jokes about dying." "Then what would you have me say?" Elias crossed to her, his hands finding her shoulders. "That I regret our time together? That I wish I'd chosen the gallows 4 months ago, rather than discover what it means to love someone completely?" The word love hung between them like a confession neither had dared voice before. Isabella's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You love me. Desperately. Completely. Against all logic and survival instinct." His smile was heartbreakingly gentle. "Did you think all those nights were just performance, Isabella? That every touch and whispered endearment was calculated?" "I hoped," she whispered, "but I was afraid to believe it could be real. It's the most real thing I've ever experienced." Elias pulled her closer, his hands framing her face. "Which is why I need you to know that whatever happens in Port Royal, these months with you have been worth any price." Isabella finally let the tears fall, her careful composure dissolving entirely. "There has to be another way. Some alternative we haven't considered." "Such as?" "Escape," she said desperately. "I could arrange it. Make it look like you overpowered a guard, or—" "And then what?" Elias interrupted gently. "I disappear into the Caribbean while you return to your life as if nothing happened? Isabella, you're carrying my child. Do you think I could live with myself knowing I abandoned both of you?" "Better abandoned than dead," she shot back. "Is it? Would you respect a man who chose his own life over his family's welfare?" The question struck at the heart of who Isabella was. Someone who'd built her entire identity around duty and honor. She understood better than most the weight of responsibility, the cost of leadership, the price of integrity. Even as her heart screamed against it, her mind recognized the truth in his words. "There might be a third option," Elias said quietly, "but it would require a level of trust from you that I have no right to ask for. Tell me. Let me die." Isabella recoiled as if he'd struck her. "How is that a solution?" "Not actually die," Elias clarified, "but let Captain Blackwater die. Publicly, dramatically, with enough witnesses to satisfy the Admiralty and your crew." Understanding dawned in Isabella's eyes. "And then?" "Then a new man is born, with new papers, a new identity, and a legitimate reason to remain close to you and our child." He paused, studying her face. "It would mean trusting me with everything. Your reputation, your career, your future. If I betray that trust or disappear, you wouldn't," Isabella said with absolute certainty. "Whatever else you are, Elias, you're not a man who abandons his responsibilities. The logistics would be complex. We'd need help from someone with connections in both legitimate and illegitimate circles. Someone with the resources to create false documentation and the motivation to keep our secret." Isabella's mind was already working through possibilities. "My cousin James." He runs a shipping company out of Charleston but maintains flexible relationships with various maritime enterprises. He's also been trying to court my favor for years, hoping to secure naval contracts. Would he help? For the right price and the right story? Yes. Isabella began pacing, her strategic mind taking over from her emotional turmoil. We'd need to stage your death during transport to the gallows. A rescue attempt gone wrong, perhaps. Your body lost in the harbor. While I actually escape on one of your cousin's ships bound for Charleston with new identity papers waiting. And then? Isabella stopped pacing, fixing him with an intense stare. What happens after you're reborn? Elias smiled for the first time since their conversation began. Then I court the most extraordinary woman in the Caribbean properly. No bargains, no arrangements, no lies between us. Just a man hoping to prove himself worthy of the woman he loves. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and dependent on a dozen variables they couldn't control. If it failed, they'd both face consequences far worse than simple execution. But as Isabella looked into Elias's eyes, dark with determination and bright with hope, she realized it was also their only chance at something approaching happiness. When we reach Port Royal, she said slowly, how long do we have? A week, perhaps 2 if we're fortunate. Long enough to arrange the details and make contact with your cousin. Isabella nodded, her decision crystallizing with the finality of a sword stroke. Then we begin tomorrow. But Elias, she moved closer, her hands finding his chest. If this goes wrong, if something happens to you, it won't, he interrupted, covering her hands with his own. I've survived 15 years of piracy, 3 naval battles, and falling in love with the one woman in the Caribbean capable of destroying me completely. I'm not about to let a simple staged death do me in. Despite everything, Isabella laughed. Simple? You call this simple? Compared to convincing you to trust a pirate with your heart? Absolutely. As dawn approached, they held each other close, both acutely aware that they were about to embark on the most dangerous gamble of their lives. The child growing inside Isabella would need a father, and she would need a man who could stand beside her as an equal, rather than a shameful secret. By the time Port Royal appeared on the horizon 5 days later, their plan was set in motion. Letters had been dispatched to Charleston through carefully chosen intermediaries. Gold had been distributed to key individuals. Stories had been planted and alibis constructed. Captain Blackwater would die as he had lived, dramatically and memorably. But from his ashes would rise something new, a chance for love to triumph over duty, for 2 people from impossible circumstances to build something genuine and lasting. As Isabella stood on her quarterdeck, watching the familiar buildings of Port Royal grow larger, she placed one hand protectively over her stomach and whispered a prayer to whatever gods watched over lovers and fools. In 3 days she would either be free to build the life she'd never dared imagine, or she would lose everything in the most spectacular failure of her career. But for the first time since childhood, Isabella Thornfield was willing to risk everything for something more precious than duty or honor. She was risking it all for love.